Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Lux Files. I'm your host, Sean, and with me today is a fantastic person that I'm so excited to have on the podcast, Cara Hamilton, psychic demonstrator. Hello, hello, Cara.
Hello there, Sean. It's lovely to be here with you.
Thank
And what
you.
a super introduction, too. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. I'm very excited about this. So,
I am also
good, good. So, how are you?
very, very well. Just very glad it's a Friday. It is after 5 o'clock where I am.
Yeah,
Um, I realize it's lunchtime.
yeah.
So I'm so delighted that I can now rest and start to put my nose in a book and do some fabulous things, or hope to, at least.
Wonderful. This is the first time I've done my podcast in the middle of the day. Normally, I do it in the evening, and it's kind of like a really nice way to wind down after working all day, making my products and whatnot. So what I kind of like about this time period is I'm feeling very awake and refreshed, which usually by the time I get to, I've done my other interviews, which have been started at like 7 or 9:30 in the evening. It's like, okay, I'm looking forward to this, but
Okay,
I'm not a spring chicken anymore. So I'm a little tired. So this kind of feels good. Like
okay.
I feel very, very, very awake and present. And so this is nice.
So I'm going to get the difficult questions today, huh?
I yeah, I can actually think. I'm not I don't really do the podcast in such a interview manner where it's like, okay, question answer. It's kind of, a little bit of a prompt, and everyone just starts telling their story, and so it's a little bit more like I kind of feel like it's a little bit more of a conversation as opposed to like an interview, you know what I mean? So like no
Okay.
gotcha questions, no, there's no Barbara Walters going on here, you know.
Not a problem.
We're just chatting. We're just chatting. So yeah, so basically what I like to do with the podcast is really get to know the guest and because I mean I love hearing about people. I love learning about their lives and whatnot. So I like to, have everyone kind of start like, you know, that sort of seminal moment or those experiences that kind of led up to this point that set each person on their like magical or spiritual path, and then just start from there and take it all the way to what you were doing 15 minutes ago. You know what I mean? Like the people and books that inspired you, people who have joined like magical orders or magical traditions, stuff like that, talk about stuff like that. So the best place to begin is the beginning. So do you have that kind of, that seminal moment or those
Oh, yes.
experiences that kind of led up to like that aha, this
Absolutely.
life is going?
Absolutely. Mine, I love the story, and I very seldom ever tell it. Normally because if depending on company, people don't necessarily appreciate where you're coming from with this. But
Mhm.
I'm sure with your audience, they will understand completely.
Absolutely.
Now, originally, I'm actually German, despite my accent being a Scottish one. And I ended up in Scotland as a child and brought up in the west of Glasgow at a place where, very close by, there was this piece of land which no one ever built on. And I would walk my dog on this piece of land every night, every morning. I just loved it. It had this wonderful feel to it. And I started getting interested in old Celtic ways, being in Scotland, the Scottish and Irish way of thinking about the she and about the language of the trees and about the tree alphabet was really quite dear to me. And I noticed in this place, there was every single one of the trees. And I took great delight in this
Oh,
being there. And then when I was in the local library, I was looking through old books, old historical books, and I found that piece of land. It was a druid's graveyard
wow.
and also had the largest sun temple in the whole of Europe. I had not known this prior to this. It was massive, this, and before all the houses that were built around it, because it's at the top of a hill,
Okay.
it would look right down the Firth of Clyde, right down to the island of Arran, otherwise known as Evan Avlach, the island of apples, one of the ones on Maildun's voyage.
Mm.
And I could just imagine looking at the artist's impression of what this temple was like. And I found that it wasn't built upon because there were so many funerary urns buried in the ground, and the main road that was cutting through it also had, they were finding things there, but they had to just build this road. So
Okay.
as they built the road, they had the archaeologists in, and this is how all these discoveries were made. And one night, the full moon was just splendid. And as I was walking through a copse of willow trees, the moon had turned red. And I was remembering an old Fiona MacLeod, a poem at the children of the crimson moon. And all of a sudden, like little buds at the end of all these, of the leaves of the willow trees, all of a sudden, there were these red lights that started to pulse.
Wow.
And I was totally taken aback, stunned, and just agog that my dog at the same time she was looking about as well, thinking, what's going on here? She wasn't scared, but it was just so, wow, this is crazy. And the following day, when I went to walk, I carried on to the other side of this main road, where there was this old mine was there, an old metal mine. I think it was for tin, and the shaft had gone down. And again, this is sort of Stone Age type, sort of early Iron Age, Bronze Age type mine. And I went round that to where there was an old house, and it was mostly dilapidated. The brickwork, well, not the brickwork, the blockwork was about early 1800s, if as late as that. I suspect it was earlier. And because I had started reading so much on different occult topics, and especially witchy topics, I thought, oh, I'm going to look under the step to see if there's anything here. And there was a witch bottle.
Wow.
And that is what started me off on this wonderful yellow brick road to where we are at the moment.
So, do you still have that witch bottle?
I wish I did. I don't anymore. I have no idea what happened to it. I've often thought about it. What exactly has happened? I suspect one of my moves in my 20s, because I used to work all up and down the west coast of Scotland through the Highlands and Islands.
Okay.
To such a degree, a number of bags and boxes of things I owned had magically vanished.
Right.
To skip, methinks, which is such a shame for that witch bottle, but I suspect that's what's happened to it.
So you were young at this period.
Yeah, that's 14 years old.
Okay.
I was 14 at that time. And
Wow.
then it just created on from there. And I did the usual path of what people do, of thinking, okay, witchcraft, that's the thing.
Hmm.
Janet and Stuart Farrer were on television, and I thought, oh, wow, that's fantastic. I'm going to get the witch's way. And I was getting other things such as that, because when you're in your mid-teens and you start looking at magical grimoires or
Mm.
Crowley or Arthur Edward Waite, uh, Goethe and things, and you start reading this, in all fairness, when you're 14, 15 years old, it doesn't exactly go in the mind the way it should do.
Right.
So you think, this is hard. So you put it on the bookshelf in any case for effect, and you read the witchy things,
Yeah.
which make sense. You grow up working in that, and then you realize, oh, I'm learning more and more. And I would not like to say you become eclectic. I would say you become wiser.
Right.
There's a bit more Sophia entering the brain and the mind and heart, and you start to realize everything is the same, just our path is what's different. It's what triggers us to do what we do for the benefit or otherwise of what's around us.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was a teenager and I started getting into witchcraft, and of course, you find out about the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So, and of course, when you're a teenager, you just want to consume everything. So, every reference in a book to this or that. So I'm pulling in all of these new age elements as well. And I thought you had to kind of like do it all and put it all together. So I started buying books on the Golden Dawn. And again, like I started when I was 14. And like you said, at that age, you open these books and you're like, I, this might as well be a completely different language. So, they just sat on my bookshelves, and wherever I moved, all my books come with me. So I've always had them. And it wasn't until like my mid 20s, mid to late 20s, that I started opening up the Golden Dawn books and everything made sense. The references and everything. It's like, oh, I know what that's referencing. I know, oh, this is, oh, and then it's like, oh, I get to explore this all over again. But yeah, as a teenager, yeah, no.
Yeah.
No.
Don't you find with learning these things later and seeing why it's relevant and getting it, you're kind of glad as the 14-year-old you didn't get it and you didn't start to experiment with it at the time.
Yeah, because I think if I tried to really work through those books after realizing that they were nearly incomprehensible, I think I either would have been so frustrated with them that there was a chance that I never revisited those books as an adult, or I didn't get frustrated. I did my best working through the Golden Dawn stuff. And because I was ill prepared for that kind of work, I would have found it ineffectual
Yeah.
and possibly as an adult not revisit them, you know? Um, so I think it was just best that way, that as a teenager, it's like I don't get this, and just put it aside until that one day cracking open one of the books and being like, oh, I can read this. It's like between 14 and 25, I learned a new language, and I was able to finally read those books and understand them. So yeah, I think it was the best way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Janet and Stuart Farr. So you're giving a hint to your age there.
Yes, one is older than one likes to let on, but I'm not ashamed of my age. I am in my fourth century, and I'm I think I'm looking pretty good for it.
For your 4th century, absolutely, absolutely. So back then, there wasn't the plethora of books available. I mean, like, especially, you know, pre 1980s, 1990s, where, you know, like the metaphysical books, magic books, witchcraft books really exploded. So, you know, the pickings were slim. Now, as a teenager, I don't think you really, I don't think that really occurs to you, like, oh, there's a lack of information. But um, how did that kind of, how did that affect your direction?
Okay, there are two different strands to this.
Mm,
The first one is I remember listening to a local radio station at night time. It was Halloween,
mm,
and listening to this interview with the owner of an occult bookshop in the West End of Glasgow. And the gentleman being interviewed, Brian Booth was his name, and he he sounded very knowledgeable. He put his points across really well, despite the interviewer almost hinting, but come on, tell us about child sacrifice.
right.
Tell us about the altars with the naked virgins. Come on.
Yeah.
He was quite clever in how he asked it. It wasn't overt. But Brian Booth was very, very good in how he addressed it. And I thought, do you know what? I didn't know about this shop. I need to go and visit. So I went to visit. He was very helpful because he obviously knows when someone comes in and chats to them, what
Mhm.
their experience is, what they would perhaps learn more from reading. So if I was going to pick up Madame Blavatsky, Isis Unveiled, he would shake his head and say, no, Janet and Stuart Farrer, read that. I think you'll get more from that at the
Mhm.
moment. And he was right. I took his advice and he was good with it. You're correct in saying there weren't the vast swathe of books on the shelves. There was really no internet at the time. So the amount of books you could read was few, but you got to realize that certain things, certain books that were being produced, for instance, Dion Fortune's Sea Priestess, followed by Moon Magic, Goat Footed Lover, and so on, these contained full rituals.
Mhm.
And in the UK at the time, you could not produce a book on occult ritual
Right.
before a certain date. So they were written as novels.
Yeah.
And therefore, when I got to realize this, oh, great, give me these to read. And the other strand of that, which I feel so lucky with where I am, with being in that area of Scotland at the time, I was very interested in the Gaelic language
Mhm.
and the old Gaelic goddesses and gods. And because of that, there are certain books, again, published, and I've got a large collection of them now from Victorian times to about 1910, Celtic antiquarian works from people such as Alexander Carmichael, got Robert Mackenzie, you've got Fiona MacLeod, otherwise known as William Sharp, his real name, who used Fiona MacLeod so the gentleman of the day wouldn't read his works because, of course, you don't read a woman's work, you read a learned gentleman's work.
Right.
So these secrets he was imparting were going out to people and would continue to do so. Very clever of him to do this.
Mhm.
But because of this, there are always incantations. The old Celtic incantations in Gaelic using threads, using rowan berries, which, okay, for some, the language had changed over time to suit the Christian influence which came in. So you would have this lovely poetic Gaelic of a charm, a rune, an incantation, And at the end, in the name of God, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, and such, that does not go one iota.
Yeah.
But you learned these things looking at it, and you could then say, now I know what that was before.
Yeah.
And because I've done the work to learn what a lot of these are, it's not something I impart to people because they can do their own work.
Right.
To find it, not that I'm being jealously guarding it, I felt that working it out made it special.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
That's why I do so. So that's the other strand that's there, where these people, it's a bit like in Canada and going down Appalachia in the USA, certain people during the early 20th century went out to learn all the old folk tales and record them for posterity.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, history, folklore, our knowledge now would be so much poorer if these things didn't exist. And this was the Scottish and Irish version of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful to have these, because one of them, for instance, when we think about, I'm trying to get the title of this book correct, The Commonwealth of Fairies, Elves and Fauns.
Yep. Yeah.
Secret Commonwealth by Robert Kirk. Where I used to live in Argyll, I used to live very close to where one of his churches was, because he was a Church of Scotland minister.
Right.
And the Church of Scotland in general was considered very austere, very Protestantly austere.
Mm-hmm.
There is a joke in Scotland that the Church of Scotland banned sex standing up in case it led to dancing. And which kind of typifies what the church was about. Now, he's a Church of Scotland minister.
Sorry.
I'll be quiet while you guffaw.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, Lord.
Well, because he's a Church of Scotland minister at the time, he's seeing all these otherworld beings. He's recording what he's seeing. He's writing the legends, the myths of, and the folklore of the place, and making it into a very entertaining and absolutely engrossing narrative, whilst his congregation is not terribly aware, or his employer, the church, not very aware of what he was doing. And this is the 17th century, when people are still burning witches in Scotland.
Yeah.
He's putting this out there. And one of his churches, beside it, there's this hill. It's called the Hill of the MacLarens, because that's whose clan land it's on. And this hill used to have Beltane fires lit all the way through into the 1800s. That ancient ceremony was still conducted, and the heroes of the Celtic warrior class would be going up to the top of these hills and lighting the Beltane fires on these Munro Mountains. They're not as big as some in where you are, but 4,000 feet is quite a distance in anyone's language, 4,000 feet high. And you would have people like Rob Roy McGregor going up these mountains to Ben Ledi, the Mountain of Light, and lighting these fires up there. The boats were still going round to the funeral aisles, the Innismorrigan. They'd be going round 3 times and then burying a clan chief on there in the same way as the Vikings used to do. So there's huge crossovers there. And these books, these Victorian books, and earlier that were being produced, the absolute wonders that these give people is fantastic. And many people don't look for them simply because I think it's classed as too wordy, it's too old-fashioned in method of writing to understand.
Yeah.
tell you what, so worth it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I don't know if you can answer this, but these Beltane ceremonies that continued on and existed up until the 1800s, were they very Christianized at that point, or were they more like folk tradition where it wasn't like an act of pagan practice, but it wasn't really a Christianized religious ceremony either? It was just, this is what we've been doing for thousands of years, and we're just continuing this.
I
Just for
think it
fun.
was I believe it was an accepted practice
Mm.
that the church would accept for the simple reason when it comes to the Scottish and Irish lands in particular, there were very strong spirit and otherworld belief that still continues. And if you're in the right places at the right time, you still see it.
Right.
You will see the she on the air.
Yeah.
Because of this belief, the church would never be able to stamp it out.
Yeah.
And being very pragmatic over time, they accepted it and decided to change things. So instead of saying to Bridget, it would be Mother Mary
Right.
or St. Bridget.
Right.
Or
So there was a level of Christianization of
there
the,
was a level,
yeah.
but the Roman Catholics had, because that was obviously the early church,
Mhm.
and they just, okay, you can do what you're doing, but let's make a few changes to make it acceptable to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that permissible?
Yeah.
And they did that. When the Church of Scotland came in, they were a bit stick in the mud, to put it mildly, apart from Robert Kirk, because one of the things they did in this Hill of the Maclarens, one of the Victorian ministers, when he died, he was buried on the very top of it. So the Beltane fires, if they were going to be lit, they'd have to be lit over his dead body,
Wow.
quite literally. So he had his big headstone on top of there to try and make it difficult for people to continue that practice.
Huh.
But they're still held.
Yeah. Well, it was only last year or the year before I read an article in, and this was somewhere in the north of Scotland, and I can't remember the details, but there was something that was going to be done off the waters of the coast up north, and everyone's like, oh, but the ferries, and the government put a kibosh on it.
Yeah.
So I mean, if it's 2020 or 2019, whenever it was, and everyone's like, yeah, but you can't do this because of the ferries, it's really no surprise that 150 years ago they're still lighting Beltane fires.
Absolutely. And I remember I was visiting, this has got a tale within itself, so I'll try and curb it. Otherwise, I'll be talking forever. I was visiting a good friend of mine called Thorbjorg, who was a Norse shamaness, and she lived up near a place called Plockton. One of the places where the Wicker Man film was filmed
Okay.
was up there, and in the big house there, the grand piano's still there, and the music on the piano is, if you peer through the window, is Here Comes the Wicker Man. It's
Ah,
still there from when the film was made with
wow.
Christopher Lee, and she was up there, and we thought we'd have our Beltane fire on the beach, and she grew lots of strawberries. This was their thing. They made organic strawberries, her and her husband.
Okay.
And I didn't realize, but her husband, the story I was told, I've got reason to, no, I'm not going to say anymore in case there's litigation, that Toby had a special friend at one time, and they would both sit and smoke certain substances.
Okay.
And due to the smoking of these substances and them talking and coming up with all sorts, the Discworld novels were created. So Terry Pratchett was his friend, and that was the
Oh,
origin of Discworld, was this. But that's an aside, because the three of us went out to the beach. I say beach, it's very stony and rocky.
right.
And we created a big built-in fire, and we were going to jump over it, but we made it too big, and we thought we'll just dance around it.
Yeah.
And we lit that fire, but all the way around the coast, because you've got all these little islands, you've got all these little inlets and so on. And one thing we saw, lots of fires around the coast.
Oh, wow.
And I had found out in that trip as well, there are families up there who their belief system is still the old belief system. They have never integrated really
Right.
with the current society. So it's a bit like when people imagine there's somebody living in the middle of the bush who still worships something old, and the knock of a preacher has never reached their door.
Right.
These people are still there. Not many, but they're still there. And I thought, wow, that's a beautiful thing to
Yeah.
realize.
That's pretty
What we
extraordinary.
are all, what we are all rediscovering, there are some people of that origin still out there who
Yeah.
haven't had to revisit because their family has always lived it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. And I mean, a lot of the listeners or viewers of this episode, like I keep track of my analytics because my podcast is new and it's exciting to see, uh, all of that and where people are listening from. And, the majority come from Canada and the United States, where we don't have that. We don't, as Europeans in North America, we don't have that extended history. So, I think a lot of people listening would just find that just extraordinary. That idea of people that never really integrated faith-wise with the larger society because we just don't have that history, you know.
There is,
That's fantastic.
okay, I'll tell you something you're perhaps unaware of. And there is a really tantalizing piece of history. It's with Canada in particular, especially central Canada, because this refers to the Swampy Cree, really, as the Cree tribes of Manitoba going into Ontario and obviously across to Saskatchewan.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a really interesting thing. When the Scots went over as fur traders, as trappers, and so on, back in the late 16th century, because the Nonsuch was about late 15 something, I think, when it first arrived. But when the Scots who went across, they went across basically because of the Highland clearances. They were not welcome in Scotland from the British authorities because obviously Jacobites were defeated.
Right.
So their dress of wearing a kilt and tartan was banned. The use of the Gaelic language was banned.
Yeah.
And the use of indentured service, basically slavery for 9 years, had been brought in unless you joined the Hudson Bay Company or the Northwest Company beforehand and you went across. But one of the things they found when speaking to the Cree was they had a similarity of certain words, which is stunning, which ties both things together. And it gives such a wonderful thought of what might have been. Because when they're speaking about things on, I guess, head, and so on, trying to rudimentary language, the Scottish word for foot is moccasin.
Oh, well, that's interesting.
Yeah, isn't it just?
Huh.
Where did it come from?
Well, I suppose, I mean, because we know the Vikings were here in North America a lot earlier than Columbus. Maybe, who knows? Who
It's
knows?
not a, it's some Scottish words have Viking or Western Norse influence in them,
Mhm.
but that is a pure Gaelic word.
Okay. Okay.
It has no Norse in it at all.
Huh.
So yeah, that makes you think,
Yeah. I mean, I think
okay,
there's a lot more to human history than we know, because we just think it's so incomprehensible that someone can get into a canoe and cross the ocean. But we know it's been done, like Pacific Islanders, that's how they do things. So I think there's more to human history than we know. More connections, and just for some of the listeners, you brought up the Hudson Bay Company. So that was set up back in the early or mid 1600s, as a trading company, um, between here and Britain, here, Canada, I mean. And it still exists. It's the oldest Canadian company. It still exists. Like
yeah,
it's a department store chain now. Well, you would know that because you've been to
yeah,
Canada. But
and
it's
and
it's a department store chain now, and it still exists. Yeah.
yes, I love the store. It was too
Yeah.
expensive, but I love the store, and I'm very lucky. I have an old Hudson Bay blanket
Oh,
coat.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I've got one, and in one of my stage presentations, I use it on stage
Hmm.
because I speak about the early Scots who went across, who were performers, and is how you started getting the early circuses and early sideshows started to happen
Right.
because of people who came from, say, Orkney Islands here.
Hmm.
So when I was performing in at Stromness in the Orkneys, they loved the fact I could draw together the Hudson Bay Company history going between Orkneys and to across in Canada, which they
Right.
thought was fantastic. And especially as where I was performing a lot of the time when in Canada was around Winnipeg.
Right. Which isn't
So
far from, that's only an 8-hour drive from where I am right now.
which anyone from the UK, trust me, that's not far.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. So an 8-hour drive to people in the UK, like that's really cross country. An eight
Yeah,
hour
that's
drive
what,
here in Canada is a nice little afternoon jaunt, really.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because one of the places that I make a lot of jewelry. I think you've seen some of it. The
Yeah.
gold from that jewelry, some of it comes from a place called Helmsdale here, which is where all the Selkirk settlers that ended up around the Winnipeg area, that's where they came from. They were basically
Oh.
uprooted from Helmsdale and across to there.
And
So
and we have a city there called Selkirk.
yeah,
Yeah.
with the
A lot of my family, on my father's side, because there's lots of French over there. I'm French on my father's side, French Canadian. It's his first language. So lots of relatives over in that area, around
yeah,
Selkirk. Yeah.
yes. So the Orkney islanders loved the fact you could draw in some of the history, the spooky history from here,
Mm-hmm.
and the sideshow history, the fortune telling that happened here, the second sight, and then make it grow up in the new world in Canada and trace it as part of the show and demonstrations that were part of it, which is super. And the fact that that old Hudson Bay blanket jacket was on stage, and it's a very old blanket. I don't know how old it is, but the inside of it has been changed several times. So I'm pretty sure it is 19th century, although I can't prove it.
Right, right.
But I'll never part with it. It's just too precious
Oh, I
an
don't think
artifact
so.
to have.
How do you know this? I don't know if if you would know this, but how were the Scottish people perceived by the Indigenous people? Like, I mean, we have a very complicated history with colonialism and whatnot
Yeah.
here, of course. But you know, like you have like the Scots and the Irish that weren't treated well by the Brits back in the day. Is for the Scots that came here to Canada, was there a sort of um I don't know, like a comradeship between them and the Indigenous people, you know,
I
like
well, I think to a degree there was,
yeah.
not universally,
Hmm.
but I believe there was, more so, for the simple reason the Scots and Irish that went across, particularly Scots, they were the trappers. They were the people out in the bush, and therefore this is how the Métis came about. Because the French as well
Hmm.
is because they would marry someone who probably had a wife back in Scotland or back in Nantes or wherever in France.
Yeah.
But the men who came out, they would marry somebody who was in one of the local nations, and essentially this was their country wife,
Hmm.
as the description was. And sadly, some of the nations thought you're besmirching our blood, and the Western powers thought that about the Scots or French who did the same, which is why the Métis just became a law unto themselves, and I have nothing but admiration for them. They were not going to be stamped upon by either.
Yeah.
Um, they secured their own existence. So brilliant. So they were ones in the field, and you can either try and take over and make life hard, or you can try and get on with people.
Yeah.
And the Scots more so, whilst a Scottish person will cause an argument in an empty room, they are also the first to make friends with somebody as well.
Right.
So I think that's partly it. Oh, and one other thing which I find really quite exciting. Now, the person whose name I do not know the name, I cannot remember it, but there's a church in Dumfries in the south of Scotland, which is called Greyfriars Church.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry, St Michael's Churchyard. I'm thinking Edinburgh. Greyfriars Churchyard in Dumfries. It's where the poet Robert Burns's mausoleum is. But the son of one of the ministers there went out as an officer in the British Army to be in, well, this in the, trying to think, is one of the companies that Charles II had set up. It's much later. It's during Victorian times, really early Victorian.
Okay.
And he was one of the officers in charge of this fort. And a really harsh winter had hit. A lot of Indigenous people were in the fort, and the fort officers decreed this food is for the British people, the Indigenous people can just starve.
Mm.
This Scottish man decided, I'm not having that. And he basically put the officers under lock and key and gave the vast majority of people who were Indigenous, he gave them the food so that everyone would survive. Now, he was censured quite radically, but I think that's quite a heroic act.
Absolutely.
And I think you remember the accent of the people who have been good to you and with you. He wasn't acting like a charity worker, because I often think sometimes that can be seen as you're handing down to somebody. But he worked with people. He was one of them. They were one of his kind as well. So that's kind of the way a lot of Scots who entered Canada early on, how they acted and how they behaved.
Yeah.
One of the main Métis leaders, Cuthbert Grant, I took several people from Winnipeg to the graveyard where his father and his brothers are buried up in the northeast of Scotland, near Elgin. So I took them up there. There's big crossovers,
right,
in many things. And I think it's one of the reasons a lot of Scottish people in particular are drawn to Indigenous belief, is because they see a similarity, they see a resonance. And I think it's something which has traveled through the blood as well. One of the things which makes me think about this is, now we're coming fairly close to up to date now, I suppose, is 1923 in Winnipeg on Henderson Highway. There is the Henderson House. And this house had lots of seances at the time where you would have banks of cameras. Now, bearing in mind, cameras are this size at the time.
Huge. Yeah.
And they've got the 30 cameras in a bank. And considering the amount of flash powder that was used, it must have been like a firework display. And this was used during seances there. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was involved in these seances in this Hamilton House. And note I say Hamilton House.
Oh, right.
Yeah. My relations.
Right.
From
wait. This house is where?
On Henderson Highway in Winnipeg.
So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was in Canada?
Yeah, he did a tour of seances and famous mediums.
Oh, I didn't know that.
No, he was very big. One of my very first stage shows, I just called 1923, and a lot of it was based around the spirit phenomena experienced in the Hamilton seances and from the Marlborough Hotel in the Merchant District of Winnipeg, because that place is haunted like nothing on earth. I mean, they don't need staff for the sheer amount of spirit activity there.
Wow.
But there is such a big tie-in between the Scots and Canadians, the Indigenous people there, in so many different ways. It's a weave, a bit like the Voyageur's sash. I like to think of it like that. It weaves together beautifully, all of them together.
Yeah. I wonder,
partly what drives.
You said, it's in the blood. I do wonder, like, if it's a racial memory, with the Scottish people, like this is how we were, before, and kind of wanting to recapture that, or bring that magic back into their lives.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you something I do in my Spiritism performance.
Mm.
I use a lot of mesmerism in it. I don't like hypnosis. I use mesmerism
Okay.
in this. And one of the things I found I can do, putting someone in a mesmeric trance, and I believe it's the, call it folk soul, call it residual family memory,
Mm.
whatever you wish to call it, because there's so many different names for the same thing.
Right.
I inquire about the people in the audience. Sometimes beforehand, and I'll do it discreetly. It's not to find something out I can use in a larcenous way,
Right.
but I simply wish to find if somebody has a history or family history that involves particular foreign countries.
Okay.
And what I then do is I have pieces of card, a bit like the size of this pack of tarot, and I have a word in a particular language. The last time I did this, I used Russian.
Okay.
So I've got several different cards of different languages there. And I have someone up on stage, put them into the mesmeric trance. The audience obviously sees this and sees the words in Russian. And I give it to this person who swears they can't speak Russian, although their ancestors did. And I ask them, read that, what does it say? And they will say, understand. Next card, blue, it's the color blue, but it's all in Russian is what they're reading. But they're interpreting it through that residual memory of hundreds of years to read it in English today.
That's fascinating.
Isn't it? And people are seeing this in front of them, and the person it's happened to, they're basically in tears because it's so profound.
Yeah.
Brought this up from some part of their spirit, their soul, a residual memory within the body, wherever it's come from, and they can then speak or understand the way their ancestors can do. So their
Right.
subconscious has done this, but their conscious mind trying to interpret it obviously can't say it in Russian
Right.
because they don't actually know it
Yeah.
in their conscious self. So they express it in English.
So I feel like I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Once you take them out of the mesmeric trance, they can't look at those words and be like, "Oh, I know what that is."
No,
Like
once they're out of the trance, they're seeing it in Russian.
they're done. Yeah, they're done. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of figured that's how it was going to play out. When did you start doing performances, like these types of performances? And we'll definitely talk about like everything you do on stage, but when did that all begin?
Um, it's no secret, dear viewer watching this, that I'm transgender. And when I changed, prior to changing to be who I needed to be, I was a fortune teller. I did all various different psychic services for
Okay.
people. And then when I changed, lots of things changed. And I thought, I need to do this on stage and explore our psychic senses, what people have the power to do, and to do it in a different way.
Mm.
Not to do it as if, let's explore this scientifically.
Right.
Which, yeah, you can check on stage scientifically what I'm doing, you can do.
Kara, hold on Okay, now the dogs are taken care of. Sorry about that. I'll continue
No
on.
problem. No problem. No, I felt I needed to change how to demonstrate psychic arts, how to show there was more to the world in a more entertainment-based setting, because people want to believe, people want to see, they want to experience. And let's face it, sitting in a laboratory with people wearing white jackets, white coats, doing lab tests is not going to cut it.
Right.
So if you do it as a theatre experience, or do it as, let's say, one of the ways I've changed it is to make several different types of demonstration performance. So one is on the history of witchcraft.
Okay.
One is on seances and fortune telling. Spiritism is another one, which is a bit of, it's more of an entertainment extravaganza, as opposed to, let's give you lots of interesting information here as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's where I can do things such as mesmerism in the performance without, because if I put my talking teeth in, if I were going to do this in one of the other performances, it wouldn't fit, because obviously there's a flow, because I'm presenting it with an entertainment vibe. I like to think of it as the old-fashioned BBC viewpoint of to educate and entertain. So that's what I'm trying to do. And the one which I've just started doing now, well, I've not performed it yet. At the end of the year, I will be in the old operating theatre in London, doing the first performance of Jekyll and Hyde, so where the story from Robert Louis Stevenson came from, and all those strands put together, which involves devil worship, science, alchemy, robbery, witches. There's so much in there, and even mesmerism and spiritualism in that tale too. So all of that, it's the way in which to present it to people, so they know the history where appropriate, they understand it. And the important thing is, and this has happened beforehand, one of my audience did not realize I was standing behind them in the centre of Glasgow one day. And they were saying to each other, they were looking at a road sign, saying, see that, see him. They were speaking all about the person in the road sign, because I saw this woman who was talking about it, and see the stuff this person did. And they recanted the history perfectly. So the importance of telling the history in such a setting means people get it.
Yeah, right.
And that can be important, especially with things like witchcraft, because so many people today think, no smoke without fire, though. They must have been doing something.
Yeah.
And when you have people in an audience, in one particular audience, I had people come up to me at the end of the presentation, which includes using things such as using witches' effigies, because I have actual historical effigies.
Okay.
Heck, I even use a real hand of glory. I have one of them in my private museum.
Wait, you have a genuine hand of glory?
I have a genuine hand of glory. It's
Wow.
in my private museum.
Wow.
I'll send you a picture of it.
Oh,
later.
I want to see it. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Not for broadcast.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But if you wish to see it, folks, come and see one of the performances. There we go. Got a bit of marketing in. However, on one of these, the Witches of Pollock performances, at the end, people came up who had said, I didn't realize that about what had happened to witches, about who they were, the poor people, women of a certain age who were looking after children, things happened to the children just because they were ill.
Yeah.
And so many other things. But people of a number of different religions came up to me to say that. There would be, as you would expect, pagans and Wiccans, and witches, as you would imagine, but I had Satanists, I had Muslims, Jewish people, I had Sikhs there, I also had Roman Catholics there, old Roman Catholics who were in their 90s.
Okay.
And I was so surprised when they said they were in their 90s, and they would say, I've always thought these were bad people.
Right.
But I now know I feel dreadful for what happened to these people. It's a way in which to get the real history, entertaining manner, doing psychic experiments that echo of the time, using the witches' effigies, both a wax doll and a clay one, using the hand of glory, using witches' flying ointment in it as well. So we use all of those kind of things in that performance. So people then think, wow, I've just been taken back to the 17th century. I've seen all about this. I understand it.
Right.
From that immersive experience. And I've seen why people might think these people were using these particular arts to heal, to cure, or to maim, because they've seen experiments with it that evening. And this is where it makes the big difference. And people can know what happened in their locality, which is a beautiful thing too.
Yeah.
So I've not done that presentation in North America yet. Say yet. I've been hired to do it, but COVID is kind of getting in the way.
Yeah.
And when you do it with the fortune telling and the seance side, again, I've done that in North America. I did that in Baltimore. And again, people understand it in their own context. And the term understands the right one. You can read it in a book, you can learn the facts, but unless you have the feeling you've walked those miles in those shoes, you can't really be authoritative upon it to others. So when someone has, for instance, a churchy type in front of them, no offense if someone is churchy type, I say that in the not in disrespect, but thinking of someone who is very dictatorial. This is what we think, and anything like witchcraft is very bad. You can't do this. Because these people do not understand what it was about and what the times were about.
Right.
Why the punishments of burning at the stake were there. Because they thought the Bible said burn the person. They weren't looking at it correctly. They weren't seeing the right things. They didn't understand King James when he was putting these diktats in, why he was being bloodthirsty towards witches, or people believed he was. He was actually trying to be kind. He wasn't the sharpest tool in the toolbox, but he was attempting to not have lots of people murdered. There needed to be evidence and proof. He just didn't bank on the fact witch prickers and witch finders out there would use trickery and chicanery to find people guilty.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wouldn't bank on that.
Now, I assume that most Scottish people are aware of, the witch hunts as existing in Europe and in Scotland. But is the average Scottish person, do you think, are they aware of how especially brutal they were in Scotland? Because I mean, if you take the numbers in Scotland and compare them to England, it's two completely different worlds.
Yeah.
Or do you think they have like, is there a general understanding that it was a pretty brutal time in Scotland in particular?
No, I think most people, if they are not aware if they're coming along to see one of the demonstrations thinking, this is a piece of interesting entertainment, let's go and see this. If they're not knowledgeable about the history of it, or in any sense, they just think Britain was the same. People were burned at the stake everywhere. They're not terribly aware that in Scotland, you did not torture someone in Scotland, not physically torture where they did in England. But in Scotland, you were burned at the stake, whereas in England, you were hung, unless, of course, you were on the ducking stool and you died underwater to save your family some shame. So they weren't terribly aware of this. And even with the burning at the stake, people are not terribly aware. They tend to think of it in the sanitized lens of Hollywood, that a burning of the stake is always nice bunches of straw and hay, and then you've got twigs and bundles of logs there, and then there's the stake in the middle, the woman in the long white dress and tied with her hands at the back and her hair blowing in the wind. First of all, her hair would not be blowing in the wind because it would have been all cut off to dehumanize her. After all, if she does not look like your neighbor, it's not your neighbor being burned at the stake. And then with them being tied there, the average pyre consisted of coal, tar, wood, straw, peat, so basically turf. So it was part burning, well, part barbecue and part road building project. Really, that's what they were being burned on, and they're not aware of this. So they get told this during it. I mean, it's not a complete shock fest. This is how terrible things were. We do it in an entertaining fashion, so when you leave, you'll sleep. But you'll have been entertained and you will have got some good knowledge and info. But they definitely don't realise that 1 in 5 of people burned at the stake in Scotland was male. They always think it's only women. No, it's actually 1 in 5 was male. And the fact that now figures on how many people have been killed vary depending on source and what people believe. Personally, I think about 9,000 Scots were burned at the stake. And in England, it was 400 were hung. So vast difference, but most people aren't aware of it. And especially of what I consider the cute points of what was on the pyre, tar and coal. I mean, it's an oven, really. But people aren't aware of this. I call them cute points because when people hear that, they think they know it. And then when that dawns on them, you see it in the eyes. Oh my giddy aunt, that's horrendous. They get it. Those are the things that make the difference.
Now that just, as a point of interest for the listeners, that wasn't the standard funeral pyre for, throughout all of Europe. They, every region had their different ways of doing it. Like some places, they, instead of like a pile of wooden sticks by the stake, they had a ring. So it was another, like in Scotland, where really the victims were cooked by having this ring of fire, this ring of wood around the stake. The fire cooked them. It didn't burn them, but there were places where they were literally on a pile of burning sticks, and it was very quick, still painful. It was very quick. So I mean, there was different ways of burning throughout Europe and throughout different eras as well. There was just different ways of doing it, but all completely horrendous for the 60,000 some odd people that were actually executed of witchcraft during that 400-year time period. I know in the witchcraft and Wiccan and neo-pagan community, the number 9 million gets bandied about. And a couple of years ago, I decided I would research. I was kind of curious. I'm like, where did that number come from? Because I know that's not accurate. 9 million people were not killed in that 400-year period. So I thought I was going to trace it back to like the 60s, neo-pagan movement. And it kept going further back from that. I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe Margaret Murray and her witch cults in Western Europe book. Nope. That's Nazi propaganda, if you can believe it. That's
Wow.
Nazi propaganda, because the Nazis, a lot of them were very, pagan and blood and soil and blah 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 blah. And there's a speech that I found where they were decrying the 9 million people killed by the Semitic church, because the Jews were behind the Christian church secretly, of course, to the Nazis. And all of the the shame, how it's a shame all of those pure-blooded Aryan German women were put to death by the conniving Semitic Catholic church or Christian church, blah 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 blah. And I can't trace it farther back than now. I'm not a professional researcher, I'm not an academic, so it could possibly predate the Nazis, but the whole Nazi ideology goes back far into the 1800s.
Oh yeah.
With like the proto Nazi groups and whatnot, and that very Volkish.
Yarman and runes and
Yeah.
so
So I'm fairly confident, after trying to find the source of this number 9 million, that so many neo-pagans love to bandy about. I'm fairly confident that it doesn't predate Nazi propaganda. So yeah, anyways, FYI people, that 9 million is complete bullshit. It's more like 60,000 people actually killed, more tried, more arrested, and more tried for witchcraft, but about 60,000 actual executions. And that's maybe doesn't sound as dramatic as 9 million, but that's still 60,000 innocent souls in a 400-year period, which is pretty shameful.
Absolutely. And considering the amount of people that existed in these countries at the time, for instance, the Scottish number, considering how many people lived in Glasgow at the time, at the very start of when I do my Witches of Pollock, I ask people, are they left-handed? Do they actually read fortunes? Are they over 60 years old? Have you had an argument with your neighbor? And so they all put their hands up. I say, well, congratulations, you're the ones who would be burned at the stake, because those are the very reasons. And when speaking about the numbers, I always say to them, considering Glasgow's population at the time was 36,000 people, this is an audience of 100 people. Therefore, 4 of you would be getting burned at the stake as a percentage.
Yeah.
4 of you. And again, people get it.
Yeah.
Wow. They understand what that's thinking. Oh, well, that's the amount of people being referred to, saying 60,000. Well, that's a small town somewhere out of this great big country. No, a lot less people at the time, therefore it's pretty major, and it's got to be seen through that lens.
Absolutely.
But one thing you mentioned And I'm glad you mentioned it, because you mentioned the propaganda through Nazi Germany.
Mhm.
There's one character during that time that appears in some of my performances.
I knew who you're talking about.
Yeah, Eric
Yeah.
Jan Hanussen. And the great thing about what some of the things that he was involved in, he was a showman, he was a
Mhm.
sideshow artist. He worked with fakery, but he did real as well.
Yeah.
He worked on both sides. And I know some people dislike that. Personally, I don't. He was showing psychic ability and powers in an entertaining way.
Mhm.
And if sometimes he needed some skullduggery, to hell with it. He was
Yeah.
good at what he did.
Yeah.
Great. But he hid the fact he was Jewish. He was the best friend of the Nazi high command
Yeah.
because he had all these powers. He had a best-selling German newspaper. He was
Mhm.
touring the world. He'd done Hitler's horoscope. The Nazi high command wanted him to just profess all this great stuff. His Palace of the Occult in Berlin, in his reading chamber where all these people would come in. It would be dark at night and the candle lit. He had a throne at one end, and the throne went through the floor. He would be on the throne under the floor, and then this pneumatic pump underneath would send his throne about 15 feet into the air to tower above these people as he's there in oriental garb, his
Yeah.
crystal ball in his hand, pointing to them, giving all these professing not pontifications, all these prophecies. It sounds high theatre, and it was, but a lot of what he said came true.
Yeah.
Eerily so. But one of the things that he did, and I love this one thing, a bit beforehand, there was an English professor, well, we're talking 1931, Harry Price, who, as a psychic investigator from England and also a member of the Magic Circle, he had found in a library, I think it was Oxford University Library, this ritual, which, because I'm speaking about it just now, the ritual name has slipped straight out of my
Of
head, so I
course.
apologize. But he'd found this ritual, which was conducted on Brocken Mountain in the Harz Mountains in Germany, where at Walpurgisnacht, all the German witches would fly around on their broomsticks. And this ritual was there to turn a goat into a man.
Mhm.
A supreme power of how to show magical wizardry for real. And Harry Price was there. He had the media was there filming him. And at that time, to film was actual film,
Yeah.
and it was pretty expensive.
Yeah.
So if you were covering something, it had to be special.
Yeah.
So he did this ritual and nothing happened. And he was basically sent back to England with, otherwise he would have been found somewhere. He was persona non grata.
Right.
And then the Nazi high command said to Hanussen, can you do this? Can you make it work? And nonchalantly, as was his way, of course I can.
Of course I can.
So, because Hitler and Co and Himmler had their rune magicians trying to do this, and of course it wouldn't work. And Hanussen, yeah, not a problem. Take me to Brocken. So the filming, Leni Riefenstahl, she was there doing the filming at this. I've seen some of the film,
Oh,
but it seems to have vanished now. I've tried to find it again, but it
okay.
seems to have vanished. The stills of, you can find stills of it
Mhm.
online.
Mhm.
And I've got some stills of it. So he goes on there and he's in his top hat, bow tie, and tail.
Oh, you just froze. I think I lost you, Cara. I'm gonna hit pause here for a second. Okay, so I don't know where you were when, like how far you kept going after you froze there.
I
Um,
remember you speaking to me, so I'll start from where that speech was, because obviously there was communication there.
yeah, okay.
Yes. So Hanussen said, yeah, of course I can do this. And the Nazi high command had their runic magicians trying to make this ritual work, and of course it wouldn't work. So Hanussen said, yeah, not a problem. So Leni Riefenstahl, the famous filmmaker of the Nuremberg rallies and 1936 Olympics, she was doing the filming. And Hanussen was there in his top hat, bow tie and tails, and his cape. And he had the beautiful German virgin there in a tight silver lame dress. I emphasize that for a reason which will become apparent.
Okay.
So they're ringed with SS, and obviously they're armed. You have media, you have Nazis and so on there. And Hanussen in the middle, loving it, does the ritual. And at this one point, the goat all of a sudden is in the middle of this cloud of fire. It's just a blink of an eye, this big, almost like magnesium being burned at the top of a old-fashioned camera. Just for a split second, and the goat is gone. And here's this small German man in lederhosen and his hat with the feather in it. And the reason I mention about the woman wearing the tight silver lame dress is because magicians who speak about this, as in ones who are using rabbits and hats and things, they always say, oh, well, of course, under cover of the flame, she put the goat under her dress.
Right.
I defy anyone to do that in a tight silver lame dress.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's impossible. And I've given it a lot of thought. And any magician, as I say, the type who like the rabbits and hats, if they've read into it properly, they will all say, I've got no idea how it could be done.
Mm.
So it's one of these beautiful moments in occult history that people want to believe was done in conjuring. But was it? It's one of these things that will be left open. The
Yeah.
door is always open to conjecture.
Yeah.
But
And then,
because it was being filmed all around,
and then eventually Hitler had him killed.
yeah, realizing, hang on a minute, he's actually Jewish. It was actually said the fact it was a small Bavarian man in lederhosen looking mad that came out of the flame, it was Hanussen's joke that it was Hitler.
Oh. Oh. You know, there's a complicated, I mean, we're not going to get into the, you know, history of the Nazis and occult and all that, because I mean it's you know, people, you know, take a historical event and kind of try to make it, you know, black or white, and that's just not reality. So, you know, like the Nazis, there were a lot of the top Nazis were pagan and they were into the occult, but at the same time, they're shutting down fortune tellers and occult groups. And so, well, no, they weren't into the cult. They shut down these occult groups that weren't, you know, giving
Their
Hitler
ones.
like loyalty. Oh, surprise, you know what I mean? It's very convoluted, but the Nazis and the occult are really, really intertwined, enmeshed.
Yeah.
And people like Hanussen, um, that weren't, there was a lot of occultists and scientific astrologers, as opposed to the common fortune telling astrologers. Weren't Nazis, weren't into the ideology, but liked having a job and liked not being sent to concentration camps. So they're like, oh yeah, I'll definitely work for you guys for sure, because I want to stay alive. It's very complicated. It's easy to be like, okay, well, all of these occultists that worked with the SS and whatnot, they're all Nazis and they're all horrible people. And it's not that simple.
No, so lots of people think that Hanussen must have been a terrible person and didn't like his Jewish history, his heritage. But virtually everyone who worked for him was Jewish. It was simply, he was too well known. It's a bit like saying today that Uri Geller, we had one of these great big, the Nazis about just now, and Uri Geller was in Germany, would he be able to get away and escape? No, there'd be a bullet or a knife in the night somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was the same with Hanussen. He knew it. So he just had to play it for all it was worth and hope he got out the other side.
Yeah.
Which obviously he didn't.
Which he didn't, and I think his Jewishness obviously played a part in that, but I mean he knew too much. He was definitely a threat, and he served his purpose, and sadly he served his purpose and had to be disposed of. So he got a bullet in the head out in the forest.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so on that depressing note, we gotta we gotta liven the podcast back up again. So I want to keep talking about your performances because they're fascinating. Like, are you like a one-woman show, or is there a team? Or sometimes it's just you, sometimes you have a team, or
Yeah. So most of the time it's me. There is another person involved occasionally, but that is depending on what the performance is. And because I don't want to just do one thing, I want to try and liven it up at particular bits. For instance, I say, no one is going to jump out at you. This is not that kind of performance. We're professional. So, of course, I've got a witch that jumps out at everybody.
Of course.
Shouts and screams at them. I naturally do that. They say, you promised. Yeah. So it depends on what it is.
Yeah.
Which obviously depends upon the budget of the place as well.
Right.
Bringing in filthy money. But I obviously, if I have people involved, if we are working, say, in Aberdeen in the north of Scotland, or in Newcastle in the north of England, or London, I've got to pay for that person to be there and their hotel room and so on as well. So it needs to be able to pay for them to be there. Yeah. Otherwise, I have to re-script. It's not a case of someone gets a worse show. Yeah. It's a case of we redress it a bit. Every performance will vary slightly. So if someone has seen me a year before, the show they see the year later will have enough difference in it for them to have not sat through the same thing. They've enjoyed it again, but they've seen new things, they've heard new things. So it depends on so many different factors. If it's me or a team of people. The team of people is good, I must admit. Seeing the audience leap out their seats in fright is fantastic.
So do you kind of have like a I don't want to say like a standard show, but this is my performance and from A to Z. And as you say, things will change up a bit. Or do you have them very theme like this show is about X, this show is about Y? How do you put them together like that?
They're themed to a degree. And the way they're themed is pretty simple. The way in which I weave the tempo of the show, because you've got a bit of nice, good information. Let's
Mhm.
have a bit of excitement. Let's bring you back down. Let's make you think and feel sad. Then let's bite you up again.
Right.
More information. So you would, if you play it that way, to make it flow in in a really entertaining fashion, then what I do in Glasgow, the meat and the bones of the information about the Pollock witches, that bit in the Pollock show, when I'm doing Witches of London in October, the London equivalent, the Witches of London, will be in that slot.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I'll put the system works, the flow works.
Mhm.
So I just take the Witches of Pollock things out and I put the London bits in, or
Right.
the Leicester things, or the Winnipeg or whatever. I make sure I just change it to what is in the area in which I'm performing it.
Okay. When I
So
was
that's
just
basically.
okay, so as you were saying that, I had formulated a question in my head, and you kind of answered it when you said Winnipeg. When you're over here in North America, are like there's no the witches of Winnipeg in the same way, like like having like that rich history of witchcraft or supposed witchcraft in Europe. So how does being in North America um, change the show in that regards?
Well, there are particular areas where there is history where you can draw upon. The eastern seaboard, in other words, the old New World,
Mm,
is the prime place where you get the most work on it. So
right.
when I've done this in Baltimore, that worked a treat. I was going to New Orleans to do it, obviously great for it,
Yeah.
but obviously COVID got in the way of that. And then going up to New England and Maine to do it as well, which is meant to be August. Now, when you put all of those places together, you can do it.
Mhm.
If you then decide you want to go and do Yellowknife, Saskatoon, San Francisco, it's a lot harder.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, it has to be geared more towards the spirits of the tenements, the seance, the fortune telling, and going into the spiritism.
Right.
Uh, it needs to be more of that than the way of speaking about people being burned on stakes and so
Yeah.
on, because it ain't going to wash there, because
Yeah.
that's not the history. You have to be loyal to the history of the place so that whoever's being at the show, they see their own history
Mhm.
being played legitimately in that way. Unless, of course, I'm doing the Witches of Pollock somewhere in North America, say Phoenix, Arizona. If
Mhm.
I do it there, it's got no resonance there whatsoever, but I can draw into it the Highlander aspects because of the popularity of Outlander.
Right.
I
Right.
can bring some of that in so that people have seen that on television. It's of interest to them. They love it.
Mhm.
Therefore, they want to see about the spooky things that happened at that time. And
Right.
therefore, that works. But it's a case of being not trying to say to someone, as I say in San Francisco, oh, the old witch's coven here of 1795, and just telling flim flam.
Yeah.
You can't do that.
Yeah. 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 Oh, that's interesting. So once COVID is over and done with, you're going to be taking a trip here because you have shows lined up here in North America.
Yeah, yeah, I've got shows lined up for August. I'm unsure how that will work, if I will be able to do it, because COVID is lingering here with new variants that we thought were done and gone, because I was about to book my tickets
Mhm.
and realize, well, at the moment, I am not allowed to travel to
Right.
North America, and it's just awkward. So if I can do it via Zoom, I'll do it. But I so wish to be back in front of North American audiences because they're super.
Yeah.
I love performing in front of North American audiences. The ones in Baltimore were great because I loved in Winnipeg and when I was working in Saskatchewan. All of that was fantastic. I want to get back to it. I've still to go to Toronto,
Mhm.
and I've only ever seen the airport there, so I want to do a performance there.
Yeah.
And of course, I've heard the center of the universe is a place called Thunder Bay.
Of course. Absolutely it is. It's all happening here in good old Thunder Bay.
And my plane has been over it, so I've seen it from above.
That's
I
the best.
waved, you
That's
didn't see.
yeah, that's the best way to see it. It's nice here. I mean, it's a small city. We have like 100,000 people. I mean, it's not very big. It's pretty. We're right on Lake Superior. It's just we're so remote, you know.
Yeah,
The closest big city in Canada would be Winnipeg, which is an 8 hour drive away west of here. If you drive 8 hours east, you hit Sault Ste. Marie, which is a little smaller than Thunder Bay. And if you drive 4 hours south, you can hit Duluth, Minnesota in the States. Um, it's the thing I keep saying remote. I almost make it sound like it's one of, the northern towns that are like accessible only like from a logging road or something. But like I spent most of my adult life in big cities like Houston or Toronto or Ottawa. Especially like Houston's great. Like living in Texas was great because I mean, there's no crappy winter weather. So any time of the year, you can just get in your car and be like, oh, I'm going to drive an hour and end up in this town or that town. Or, everything was just so accessible and you could just go and there's somewhere else to be that's, not too far of a drive away. Whereas here, I mean, I wouldn't, you know, in the middle of February, the worst of winter, be like, oh, I'm going to get in my car and drive to Sault Ste. Marie because I don't want to die. Um, driving through the Canadian Shield, driving off a cliff, you know? So this is a nice city. I grew up here. It's just, it is what it is. It is what it
you're
is.
used to it.
Yeah. I mean, you'd have a great, very big, very receptive audience here for your show. It's like that would go over well. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, you know.
There's one thing I never mentioned,
Mm,
and I'm going to talk about it because I'm still not going to mention it. I know that sounds backwards.
right.
I realize that. I never say to anybody, we spoke about how I got to what I do,
Mhm.
but not about what I believe occult wise, spirit wise, and so on.
Right.
But when I perform on stage, I don't tell anyone that because we're aware that if you say you are X,
Mhm.
everyone in the audience who is also X thinks, great, you're one of us. And then they think, oh, but I disagree with you in this point and that point.
Yeah.
I'm remaining separate.
Yeah.
In all of this. So if someone is Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Wiccan, Satanist 3 times removed, it doesn't matter what they are.
Mm-hmm.
They are unaware of what I am. Therefore, they have to accept what I am saying as expert knowledge.
Right.
And the person who is different from them. And that's why I do that. Um, I know you watch my tarot, which that I put online
Mm-hmm.
every Monday to Friday morning. And one of the things that's apparent there to people is that I'm very much a Gurdjieff girl. I love Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's fourth way, and a lot of my thought processes and my philosophy of working in spirit and the occult comes from that lens.
Mm-hmm.
I would never sign on the dotted line, religion, Gurdjieff. I would never, ever do that either, because it's just one part of the mix that I very much appreciate. And again, as we said at the very beginning of this, it was one of the things I started to read when I was 15 years old, and my brain rebelled and said, no, too hard. But the last 10 years, love it.
Yeah.
Get it, understand it, enrich my life. So it's kind of back to the beginning with it all, but that's the beauty of this field, isn't it? It's a circle.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a never-ending circle. But from a performer's perspective, that's really smart about you almost treating yourself as almost like an object and not a defined person with a defined set of beliefs and opinions, because then like that Christian person that's, oh, she said she's a witch, so I don't know if I can believe everything she's saying because she's a witch, those people were witches, she's biased. And in my experience, when I bring up the discrepancies between the neo-pagan 9 million witches burned, and they were all actually pagans who never converted, and I'm like, well, actually they were Christian people who didn't practice magic, and it was only 60,000 that died. They kind of respond like, I'm betraying our people by saying that. No, you're putting your biases on me because I'm pagan. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to be like, oh well, this isn't true, but I'm going to pretend it's true because I'm pagan. Like so no, that's very smart on your part.
Yeah. There's one thing, whenever I get that, but what are you? But what are you? And when you get that scenario that you just said, there's something I always bring up. I say to them, you know that old adage of, oh, you don't argue about the price of a ritual object. Where do you think that came from? It was a ritual trader. Don't argue about the price of the crystal ball because you'll jinx it. I wonder who said that.
Yeah.
The person selling the crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Way back in time.
Yeah.
And they get that. And then you can expand on other things because they realize, hang on a minute, I've just been stupid and found out. But there's no crime in that. It's a case of learning the whole time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That's fun. I would love to see one of your shows. That sounds absolutely fascinating. Now, one thing maybe that I think would be kind of good to explain is the difference between mesmerism and hypnotism.
Okay, mesmerism came first.
Hmm.
It was Franz Anton Mesmer, an Austrian physician, and he basically is, the other word is animal magnetism. Now, people thinking animals, no, it's anima, that life force. And the concept is you've got this life force going through your body the whole time, and you can, where you're ill, there's a blockage in it. When you're well, there isn't a blockage. You can give somebody extra anima there to boost themselves if it's leaking from somewhere or whatever, to heal them. That is the idea. If you have a good amount of it, you're healthy and you're well. It ventures almost to what people think is hypnosis, because you're giving these mystic passes over people where you're massaging the aura of the power, the anima in the body. Whereas hypnotism, which came later, used some of the attributes of mesmerism. It was a Scottish doctor called James Baird who founded hypnotism really as a school of thought, where he used some of the mesmeric techniques, but brought it into purely, let's use this for making your mind compliant and your subconscious listening to what we're saying to create healings in that way. During spiritualist meetings in the late Victorian age, it was mesmerists who did the healings, all this hands on people. That was the mesmerists. That was what they did. They would do that, and when mesmerism eventually was denounced as flim-flam, then, because doctors at the time, they said, oh, it's absolute rubbish. Look, it's not doing anyone any good whatsoever. And there's a really couple of good facts to do with this. During this time, you're talking early 1700s, you had an electrical device which was called a Leyden jar. Basically, it's a big battery.
Mm-hmm.
And you really couldn't control the voltage of this battery. So you've got the copper wires, and whereas the doctors of the time were saying mesmerism doesn't work, it's flim-flam, it's rubbish, just using suggestion and so on. Get going, Franz Anton Mesmer. We don't want you anywhere near here. That's it. We've sorted him out. Now let's get back to real, actual science. Where's the blind girl? Right, bring the blind girl in. Now we're just going to put these electrodes on your bare eyeballs, and then we're going to shoot you a shock from this electrical battery. And that was medicine at the time.
Oh God, we're so barbaric.
Yeah, actually, it was the opposite way around. I got it. The doctors were doing this with the Leyden jar. This poor girl, basically electrocuting her eyeballs, thinking, let's see what it does. Will it jumpstart her sight? And of course, after a number of times, it didn't. She was a gibbering wreck.
Yeah.
Mentally damaged. And they said, okay, let's see what the mesmerist can do. Look, she's a gibbering wreck, so let's get rid of the mesmerists because it obviously doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, maybe electrocuting someone's eyeballs did the job. Because it was also the mesmerists who used a stethoscope first. They used stethoscopes to assess your heartbeat, your lung capacity when they were doing their work.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
A
interesting.
lot of people don't, but
Yeah.
a lot of medical science came from the mesmerists, which then was conveniently forgotten about.
Of course.
Like the batty ant in the attic for modern medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean that's the whole story of science and medicine, take the good stuff from, the herbalists and then denounce the herbalists, take chemistry from the alchemists and denounce the alchemists, denounce the midwives. A woman can't deliver a baby. It's got to be a male doctor.
Yeah, what does a woman know about women's parts?
what,
Yeah.
what does a woman know about giving birth? I mean, come on now. Come on now. Use your 17th or your 18th century head. What do they know about giving birth? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something else. But it's fascinating though to read um science and medicine of the 19th century, um, the things that are proven and the things that were discovered, which never were proven and never were discovered. But a lot of things that we would look at nowadays as being very new agey and being, part of, budding science and medicine in the 19th century. It's fascinating. It's really fascinating. I have no real interest in medical history, or the history of modern medicine as something, I'm going to like just sit and relax, read books about. But bits and pieces, when you learn about bits and pieces of it, it's really interesting, you know,
Yeah.
how how certain a lot of scientists were and a lot of doctors were about these proven whatever. And nowadays we look at that, we're like, what? Like they actually believe this in common
Absolutely.
science, you know? It's something else. It's something else. Um, so one thing, and I got sidetracked when you were talking about the witches' effigies and the Hand of Glory, and you were talking about your private museum. Do you have a lot of artifacts? Um, like are you someone like you're collecting these artifacts for your
Yes.
personal, collection? Uh, do they are do you use them some of them as props in your shows? I
Absolutely.
I want to hear about your
Yeah.
collection a little bit.
Yeah. I use a number of things in my shows. The reason why is if somebody is coming to see it and they're told, if they go to a museum and they see these witches' dolls under glass you can't touch, I want them to be a bit closer to it. Now, I've got to have eyes like a hawk,
Mhm.
obviously, so people don't think, oh, I wonder if this wax bends and they snap it. I never want that kind of
Yeah,
scenario to occur. So I've obviously got to watch. But I like people to hold these items. The only thing they don't hold is the Hand of Glory,
right.
because out of respect for what it is
Yeah.
and where it came from,
Oh, you know what?
really.
Explain. I'm talking like everyone, and I'm probably everyone that listens to my podcast, being the nature of the podcast, knows what a Hand of Glory is. But just in case, why don't you explain what a Hand of Glory is, just so they understand?
It is the severed hand from a murderer who was hung on a gibbet or hung, and it would be cut off. A candle would be set in it. If you watch it in the movies, it's always somewhere up here, but you can't really hold one there. It's on the palm of the hand. It's more of a squat candle. It's sat there. And that would be used if you were going to break into a house to make sure everyone in the house would remain asleep so you would not be caught. So, as a magical item, as an amulet, it is an amulet to preserve you from having your own head in a noose for housebreaking and robbery. And that's what it was used for. They were very much coveted. There are several around, many of them in private collections. I mean, mine, obviously, my private museum is a private collection of a number of different things, going from witchcraft to early seance to uh, old tarot cards, old playing cards used for particular things, witches' objects, um, a goat skull with candles and stuff set on it, which I took one night. This is a true story. from there's a barn in a place which will remain nameless.
For legal reasons.
No, so the those people do not realize it was me.
Yeah.
But in this barn, there was black magic ceremonies actually taking place in that one. It was
Oh,
as a real sort of diabolist satanic thing, not the modern Anton LaVey
right.
kind of stuff. It wasn't the hey, witchcraft with black satin
Yeah.
and goatee beards. Aren't we cool? I've even got a membership card. It's nothing like that. These were the ones who are serious.
Mm.
And I knew it happened there, these things. So I went in one night and I found this behind a bale of hay and I decided to take it. So I went off with this and it's part of my collection.
Wow. Wow. How long ago was that?
Let's say somewhere in the last 50 years.
Okay. Wow.
I
That's
think it was my 350th birthday,
okay.
something around
All
there at
right.
the time.
Okay. Good, good. That's interesting. So you said like the candles are set into this goat skull, like the candles, not by you, by
No,
them.
no, no. That was there.
Yeah.
So during these demonstrations that I give, it's one of the things that's there. And I tell the story of it, leaving out the pertinent details of where,
Right.
just in case.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Wow.
So living on the occult edge.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. That's something. I have a friend, his name is Steve Santini, and he's an escape artist. And he's in Ripley's Believe It or Not is the most extreme escape artist ever. And like if you Google him, he's always in like the top 5 or the top 10 with Houdini, and as the top 5 ever or the top 10 ever. And he I met him back in 2017, I think it was, or maybe 2018, at an occult conference called Occulticon, which was happening in Southern Ontario. It's no longer around, or not at the moment, at least, this conference. And he collects torture devices, and he has all sort, and his collection is amazing. Like, I'm not talking about like 5 pieces or 10 pieces. I mean, this is what he does, this and Titanic memorabilia and other
Yeah.
wrecks. But all of these torture devices, the amount of stuff he has is insane. And the age of some of these pieces, he has this cage with the original skull in it from, I can't even remember how old it is. If it was, can't remember if it was 17th century or 18th century. And the like thumb screws and the pricker. Now the thing is, I having an interest in the 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 witch trials in Europe, and really wanting to get to the bottom of that 9 million number. I've done a lot of reading on the witch trials to really get a good understanding of what happened. And so, you always hear about the pricker and whatnot. But I think as a modern person, you can't help but think of like a long needle,
Mm-hmm.
which that's not what the witch pricker was. I mean,
No,
it's,
it's like a shipmaker's all.
yeah, I
It's
mean,
like a sailmaker's all.
it's thicker than an ice pick. Like, it's ghastly. It's ghastly. All these items, and they're fascinating to look at. They're fascinating to be within inches of them and to know their age and know that these aren't replicas, these aren't props, these are used tools of torture.
Yeah.
But it's ghastly when you could read about them every day, all day, but when you're presented with them and you
Yes.
just realize how horrific they are.
The Scottish method of it, now the Scots did use the witch pricker as an extra. That was the ultra proving item. But the Scottish way, as I said, didn't involve torture.
Mm.
No physical torture. So you could kind of say Scots invented mental torture.
Right.
Because the idea was you had your hair shorn, and then there's about a piece of chain about 6 inches long on an iron collar that goes around the neck. It's got spikes up and down. You're not tortured, but you wear that. It's also about 5 foot above ground level attached to the wall.
Okay.
So you cannot sleep because you're going to cut yourself.
Right. Right.
So you cannot sleep. You have to stay awake. And sleep deprivation can be an awful thing.
Yeah.
If you're left with that until you confess for maybe weeks on end, you are going to be screwy. You'll confess to anything.
Yeah.
By
Absolutely.
the end of it.
Yeah.
That was where the Scottish bit comes in. And in some town centres, there's a place called Kirkcudbright in the southwest of Scotland. And by the toll booth there, basically where sentences were carried out, you can still see one of these in the wall.
Really?
Because, yeah. Now, the one they've got there doesn't have the spikes.
Right.
Because later on, the church decided that women who chastised their husbands had to be dealt a lesson for being bad, for being bad wives. So they would have a week of having this around their neck outside the toll booth, and then they could go home.
Could you imagine a week of that? That's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane.
But this is where the piece that a lot of people don't realize, the collar with the spikes on each side. The National Museum of Scotland have a great one in their museum. It's got a really good one, and you can see it online as well. You can see this collar. In local parlance in the southwest of Scotland, they call it the Dukes. I've got no idea why, where it comes from, but that's the local name for it. But this witch's collar was there to make you have, well, just so you would confess.
Yeah.
Because you ain't getting out of it unless you do.
Yeah. I can't imagine. I just cannot imagine. It's horrific. It really is. It really is. Do you have anything like that in your collection, or is your collection more like witchcraft artifacts, magical artifacts?
I've got a witch pricker there because I demonstrate it on myself.
Okay.
In the witches demonstration. It's kind of the best way to describe it. If you know what you're doing, you can do it without harming yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But you really need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you will mess up your arm, your fingers won't work, and things like that. So it's a bit like acupuncture for head cases, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah.
Is the best description. But I use a thinner needle than the great big thick one.
Right.
I use one that's a bit thinner so it can be demonstrated, because I don't want to lose use of my arm. So I hedge it. I hedge the odds in my favor when I do it. I wouldn't do it at every performance. I've got to feel all right about doing it and confident when I do it.
Yeah. Ugh. Oh, the audience must love that though. Like they must be like just freaked out, and I can just imagine all that. Oh. But
I've only had one fainter.
I mean, I wouldn't want to see it, but I wouldn't be able to look away.
Yeah,
I'd be like, oh my God, I wouldn't be able to look away, but I don't want to see that. Yeah, that's got to be quite the addition to the show.
quite gross.
Yeah, yeah,
The grossest thing.
yeah. But it's good to show that though. It's like, and this is a thin needle. Look at what the real one looked like. Imagine what we did to these people
Absolutely.
just because
Absolutely.
just because they were old or because they were foul-mouthed or they had mental health issues. This was their punishment for just being born that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's quite shocking. It's quite shocking. And I don't think we've as humans, I don't think we've evolved much beyond that, to be perfectly honest. Not really.
No,
Not
that's
really.
evident.
Not really. Not at all. I mean, that's I don't even think that's an opinion up for debate, really. You know, I think something like that can come back just like that. Really
Oh,
easy.
absolutely. Yeah.
Really, really easy.
Well, you have to just see things such as what's happened in the Balkans and so on very quickly, from people being neighbors to being mortal enemies.
Yeah.
How quickly things can just turn, and the ways in which to um, treat people. Because one of the reasons I love doing the witches thing, especially, is because when people at the end, they'll say, some people say, but that doesn't, it's just so good that doesn't happen anymore. Say, well, actually, in a number of countries around the world, it does.
Mm-hmm.
If you were to go to Saudi Arabia and you were found guilty of witchcraft, you'd be taken to your Walmart as Safeway car park, and you would be beheaded in the car park,
Yeah.
which happens there
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
And people say, what? People don't realize that, oh, this is ages ago. This is something we see in Hollywood made movies. And then when they realize it's not, and then they realize if they ask that, because I'll never say it in
Mm-hmm.
the presentation because it's not part of it.
Yeah.
But it's if they say, oh, but it doesn't happen nowadays, and that's a good thing. So good. They say, well, actually, and then when the penny drops with it, oh, help. But I'm not going to go into politics and
Yeah. Well,
say
yeah.
countries we
Yeah.
like, countries we don't. But knowledge is power.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 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 So, I don't know. Is there
I
anything else?
don't think there is. I
Yeah.
think you've covered everything under the sun, really,
Yeah. Yeah. This has been really fun.
or under the moon.
Or Under the Moon. Yeah. So, you have a website?
That's right.
Yeah.
It is carahamilton.co.uk. Just about everything I do is on the website. I do weekly horoscopes, which go on there because I write them for a number of newspapers. All the things about the different presentations that I do. There's a what's on guide for where I'm performing and when. And there's some other interesting things. There's articles and so on. There's articles about me, articles I've written for publications and so on. There's a lot of different things there. And I keep adding to them when I get round to it,
Yeah.
which sounds like when I can be bothered, but it's when I've got something, I try and put things on that I don't want someone to say, so what? I want them to think, wow, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've got something like that, I put it on, and I'm quite delighted to do that. So there's lots of stuff on there. What you will not see on the website is performance of any of the things we've spoken about, for the simple reason seeing it in person can be jaw-dropping.
Right.
To see some of these things, like I said, someone reading Russian and English, getting it accurate, and they don't know Russian.
Yeah.
So to do things like this, me doing the witch pricker through my arm or through my neck, something like that, seeing these things, seeing these psychic experiments live has an impact. And watching it in a video, people can just say anything.
Yeah.
And people can try and copy. But some of it's very dangerous, so I don't want them to copy.
Yeah.
So I leave it purely for when you see me live.
That's excellent.
And that's the rationale.
Yeah, yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. And everyone can also follow you on Twitter as well.
That's right. And I think it's Cara L at Cara L Hamilton.
Mhm.
I think that's what it is.
You know, it's funny, like we live on social media nowadays, and I can't even remember like what is there a height, you know, with all of mine, like, is there a hyphen? Is there Cara L. Hamilton, Cara, Cara, not K-A-R.
Yeah.
So at Cara L. Hamilton for anyone that wants to follow you on Twitter, which I recommend that they do because you put some fun stuff up there and you do your daily tarot videos that you put on there, which are nice as well. So I do recommend that everyone go and follow you on Twitter as well. I just for the listeners' information, your website and your Twitter will be in the show notes to this episode, so they don't have to rewind. I just said rewind. You can sure tell my age. Go back and in the podcast and try to find your website address. It's going to be in the show notes anyway. So
Oh, super.
yeah,
It's been delightful chatting to you and talking with
this
you through this. So thank you so
has
much.
been so fun. I strangely feel like you're like a next door neighbor to me. And that's probably just because you know your time here in Canada, in Winnipeg, Saskatchewan and whatnot. But I feel like we're not, you know, on opposite sides of the planet. So, you know, it was nice to chat with you and hear all of your great stories and everything. And I know the listeners will enjoy a lot of those stories. So yeah, so
I
thank
hope
you. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you being here. So yeah, you take care. And
same to you.
and I'm crossing my fingers that COVID isn't gonna prevent your travels too much longer, because we need to get you back on stage and freaking out the locals.
That would be a pleasure.
All right. So thank you so much, Cara Hamilton. And again, for my listeners, check out her website, follow her on Twitter. And of course, as you know, everyone, I'm all over social media. The best way to find me is to go to laylocansallwyn.com/links. That gives you all of my links to all of my social media, the Lux Files social media, my YouTube channel and whatnot. So that link is in the show notes as well. So go ahead and follow me all over social media, follow Cara all over social media. And until next time, everyone, take care. Bye.
Bye.